Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Byrne, president of the San Francisco Film Preserve, and welcome to Online with SFFP, our monthly series of presentations and discussions related to all things film. The San Francisco Film Preserve is a nonprofit organization based, as you might expect, in San Francisco. Our mission is to restore, preserve, and provide access to our shared cinematic heritage, doing our part to ensure that works of cinema remain accessible for generations to come. We are currently restoring 4 titles, including Lewis Milestone's The Garden of Eden from 1928, which will premiere this month at the festival Il Cinema Ritrovato in Bologna, Italy. And we have yet another 4 exciting projects lined up for a little later in the year. Beyond the work of restoring and preserving films, we are dedicated to raising awareness and exposing new audiences to the world of film preservation, which is why we started this monthly series of free presentations on all things film. We are delighted to be joined today by Ehsan Khoshbakht, discussing the remarkable work of director Lewis Milestone, and a little bit about our esteemed guest. Ehsan is a film curator, filmmaker, and writer. He serves as the co-director for Il Cinema Ritrovato in Bologna and curates the retrospective section of the 2025 Locarno Film Festival. Most recently, he programmed a major season of Iranian pre-revolutionary films at the Museum of Modern Art, and a first-time retrospective dedicated to director Anatole Litvak at Cinemateca Portuguesa in Lisbon. His latest film, Celluloid Underground, premiered at the London Film Festival and was nominated for the John Grierson Award for Best Documentary. Ehsan's newly edited volume, The Man Has Many Talents, The Lady with the Torch, Columbia Pictures 1929 to 959, was published in August 2024 in conjunction with the retrospective of the same name that he curated in Locarno, which is now touring in different countries. Ehsan is also curator of the Lewis Milestone of Wars and Men to be held at Cinema Ritrovato starting this month. We're planning to make a fairly interactive session, so you're welcome to pop your questions and comments into the Q&A section as we go along. You'll find that at the bottom of the screen. I'll serve as the moderator and will try to work your questions in as appropriate. And now it is my great pleasure to invite to the screen Ehsan Khoshbakht.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here.
My absolute pleasure.
So, why Lewis Milestone?
I think I need some sort of personal connection with a director when I go for a name for a filmmaker, because you have to spend a year of your life with that figure, researching the films, watching and rewatching the films. And without that personal connection that you might discover along the way, or you might have it before and you explore it further as you get deeper into the filmography. This was a figure that I was very much interested in, mostly because to me, he was someone whose name was always synonymous with visual flair and virtuosity. And but also someone who was forgotten. So one of the ideas for the American Master Strand in Bologna is to explore the work of directors in American cinema whose careers span from silent days to what we call silent to cinema scope. And in this case, Lewis Milestone, silent to 70mm epics of the 60s. But somehow they are forgotten. Not every director, but we have various figures like that, including Anatole Litvak, whose name you mentioned, or Frank Tuttle, a director that I admire very much. And this is one more name in those series. But also what comes with Milestone, the background, the different types of films he made, I think makes it a subject that is worthy of deeper exploration. You know, Rob, when I say forgotten, I've been wondering about the whole question of the word forgotten and who is forgotten, who's that. what do we mean by that? I have no idea, because in a way, nothing is forgotten, and in another way, almost everything is forgotten. Because the idea of canon is not as fully defined as it was before. And the whole question of cultural memory is something also far more complicated than having the name of someone like Lewis Milestone in a book of canons. I feel cultural memory is very much like 1 terabyte hard drive, that when you want to add a new file, you've got to delete something, and later on you regret, why did I delete that file? Now I need it. So this is the capacity of it. It seems with every new item, every new name, you have to get rid of some stuff. And in the climate of widespread cultural attention disorder, it's very, very difficult. But here it is, a director who's great, who received the first ever Best Director Oscar, comedy. In those days, it was different for comedy and drama, for To Arabian Nights, who was known as one of the absolute masters of Hollywood. And interestingly, he was out of fashion by the 50s, even though he lived a very long life. He lived long enough he died in 1980, to sit in front of Kevin Brownlow's camera when he made the series Hollywood, to talk about the golden days of the golden age of Hollywood. And he was one of those people who made that age golden. So I think at best we can answer perhaps why he was, first of all, why he was great, or what was great about him, and then perhaps why he was forgotten. Another thing that comes to my mind is the idea of control and authorship in cinema, because he was one of those directors from the silent period who was not only the director of his films, but also the co-writer of many of the films, also a producer. So why not? That has come to rehabilitate him as one of the key players, one of the major directors of that period. I have no idea. And hopefully this program in Bologna, which is going to feature, I think, 13 or 14 titles, and I'm hoping to expand it in near future for sort of complete retrospective on my son somewhere else outside the festival, should shed further light on his career. Again, it's similar to Anatole Litvak, Rob. He's a forgotten filmmaker whose films are not forgotten. When I played Anatole Litvak in Lisbon, there were some members of the audience not familiar with Litvak, but later on they came to me and said, oh, we have watched nearly 10 films of his before, but we just didn't connect the dots, that these are all by the same director. Same applies to Lewis Milestone, because I think almost everybody, anyone who is interested in the art of filmmaking, has heard at least about All Quiet on the Western Front, to name only one title. So he's someone whose films are known, or some of his films are known, but perhaps the name of the director is not that very well known. And it's very ironic, because his films are in empathy with the forgotten. That's one of the entry points of many of his finest films, that it is about people who are forgotten by displacement, by economic pressure, by war as like the key subject of his career, by false promises, false glory. It is the subject of his films, that the people all of a sudden drift away, are completely forgotten, erased from memories. And that's exactly what happened to him. So a bit of background. He was born, I think, 3 months before cinema was born. He was born in Odessa in today's Ukraine, but he always identified himself as a Russian Jew. And, because with someone like him, born in Odessa to a Russian Jewish family, then later on moving to Moldova, which back then was either part of Albania or Albanian was the language there. It creates confusion. And there are at least 2 or 3 sets of stamps in 2, 3 different countries claiming Lewis Milestone as their own, which I totally understand. But in his interviews, he introduced himself as a Russian and as a Russian Jew. And of course, like many people, many migrants from that region, he left behind a family who then faced tragic consequences after the Nazi invasion. His brother was killed during the Holocaust. He moved to the US very early on in 1913. And it's so remarkable that within a very short period of time, from the time he moved to the US to the time he joined the army, the US Army, and joined the Signal Corps in World War I, where he started doing photography first, and then shooting films, and then later on editing that. And that became sort of his background in dealing with moving images. And that's why also when he returned to the States, he sought a job in cinema, mostly as an editor or a cutter, as they used to call him back in the day. One of his very first works was with Harold Lloyd for Max and Keystone Studios, and later on surprisingly with Henry King. He was assistant to Henry King. He was then hired for perhaps the most extended phase of his collaborations with other people by the comedy specialist William Sider. And I think he was not only his editor, but also assistant director and occasionally writer in, 7 to 10 films. And through that association, as those films were produced, films by Sider were produced by Warner Brothers, he became the head cutter at Warner Brothers, not cutting the heads of Warner Brothers, but cutting the pictures at Warner Brothers. And I think through that, his first directorial assignment in 1925, Seven Sinners, came about. And this is a film which was lost until 2017, when it was discovered in Australia. Print was discovered. Otherwise, there was no access to this film. And there was another one right after that, The Cavemen. But I think the turning point, and not necessarily in a positive way, was in 1926 for him. So in 1926, Warner's lent him to Paramount for 2 films. So he made The New Klondike, which is a very interesting film. Actually, this film has been restored too very recently, but it was sent to us in Bologna very late when the program was finalized. So we couldn't play it, but there is another Lewis Milestone restoration out there. I think James Mokoski is responsible for it. And this is a film shot on location in Florida, and it looks really beautiful. It's about sort of the property boom there back in the 20s. So this is the first film that he made on loan to Paramount Pictures. He was assigned to the second one, The Kid Brother, for Harold Lloyd. It was during the shoot of that film that he realized that even though he's being paid $400 per week by Warner's is actually receiving $1,500 from Paramount for his services. And this is so Lewis Milestone, and this is something which pretty much defines his character. He walked out, basically. And this was a big deal back in 1926, to the extent that if you go through the trade papers in 26, there is an ongoing discussion of, how dare this guy walking out and not respecting his contract with Warner's. And as a result, he was economically blacklisted because his contract with Warner's lasted for another 4 years. He couldn't work, basically. He declared bankruptcy, and at some point he considered returning to Europe, and he considered going actually to Germany to work for UFA. But a very unusual character came to his rescue. A year before this whole episode, Howard Hughes had moved to Hollywood with the ambition to produce films. And since when we talk about the Hollywood blacklist, like economic blacklist or other types of blacklists, these are unwritten agreements between different studios. And since he was inexperienced and he didn't give a damn, he just hired Lewis Milestone because he didn't have to listen to Warner that you cannot hire this guy. So he did hire him for a film project called Two Arabian Nights. This is 1927. It's a film pretty much in the same vein as What Price Glory. And this became Lewis Milestone's first major success in silent period. Right. He signed a contract with Howard Hughes to make 2 more pictures for his company, Cato, and the second one was The Racket, and the third one came out in the sound era, the famous Front Page. And of course, in between the Two Arabian Nights and The Racket, we have The Garden of Eden in 1928, the title that you have restored, and it's not a Hughes film. Is that a film that you care for? Is it from that period?
I'm sorry?
Is that a film that you particularly care for?
Well, actually, it was not a film I was familiar with. And when I mentioned it to people, that they're not familiar with it. But when I saw it, I mean, you had been an advocate for it, and several other people had been an advocate for it. So you need to see this. And then we totally fell in love with it. It is a film that deserves a great deal of recognition. It's fun and it's funny. It's so incredibly well executed. I think it's going to be a revelation for people.
I think I was always a huge fan of that film, and I think that's actually, aside from The Racket, which is a completely different film, and we can get to that later. I think it's perhaps Lewis Milestone's most successful non-drama. It's a bit of a comedy. It has dramatic elements to it, but it's mostly like it's a comedy. And there's for those of you who have not seen the film, and hopefully we'll see it in Bologna or maybe later at the festival in San Francisco or any other place in the world, because I'm almost certain this film will travel because it's an extremely charming film. This was produced by a completely different individual, John W. Considine, and it was released through United Artists. And again, Milestone and United Artists, they have a very, very long history, a very fascinating history, which continues well into the 40s in terms of releasing his independently produced films. It's a film about deceptive appearences. And it starts as, it was very baffling when I saw the film the first time, because I thought it was a drama. It starts as a sort of a drama in Vienna, and then all of a sudden it morphs into a Riviera comedy. It is written by Hans Crowley, who used to work for Ernest Lubitsch. He worked for Lubitsch on close to 30 titles. And so you have elements of Ernest Lubitsch in the film, and perhaps because of it, is one of Lewis Milestone's perhaps most joyful and lighthearted films. And Lewis Milestone was not known for being a sort of a director with a light touch, who's, you know, it's on the contrary, and we'll get into that a bit later. Karen Griffiths in the film plays the role of this young woman raised by her baker guardians in Vienna, who, unsatisfied with her life, realizes that she doesn't want to bake pretzel until the end of her life. So she goes from Vienna to Budapest to audition for to become an opera singer. But it turns out that the place is not an opera house; it's a music hall, and the dress they put on is actually a seen-through dress that she discovers the first night of the performance. And the woman, the only person who cares for her, that it's a wardrobe mistress beautifully played by Louise Dresser. Actually, she turns out to be a baroness, and together they go to south of France to this hotel called the Garden of Eden, basically, hence the title of the film. And I think the whole film is made for getting into that location because it's about the kind of games they play there, and the sexual fantasies of the super rich who have checked into this hotel. And the hotel itself is a piece of beauty because it is designed by William Cameron Menzies, perhaps the father of film production design and art direction in Hollywood. And he had a huge influence on Lewis Milestone in different ways. First of all, he convinced Milestone that if you want to make a film, you need to have what we call today storyboard. So Lewis Milestone films, until the very end, were designed. He claimed that he used to design them himself. But his own work as, a sort of a designer of the films aside, he collaborated with William Cameron Menzies on 5 films, 5 completed films. There are perhaps a couple of unfinished films as well. And he learned that art direction and the sets, the decor, are part of the direction, they contribute to telling the story. So he became very much aware of it. And later on, I think the last film they did together, it's Arch of Triumph in 1948. For the first time, you see that actually Lewis Milestone is, in a way, imitating William Cameron Menzies' design and touch, because it's an anti-Nazi film, and Menzies had made a film in 1944 called Address Unknown. It's a remarkable film. And you see that basically in terms of framing and the visuals, a director as experienced as Lewis Milestone is sort of nodding and acknowledging the visual virtuosity of Menzies. So the Garden of Eden is significant because of that, among other things. But also, to me, it's a very it's a major film in Milestone's filmography because it is not necessarily the first film, but it's the perfect early manifestation of what I call films with 2 halves in Milestone's filmography. So he used to make films in which the narrative is broken somewhere in the middle with a change of tone and mood, in a sort of a totally conscious, deliberate break. Usually, the idea was one was Eden, paradise, and one was hell. Here, of course, it's the title is ironic and it's the name of the place. But in war films, when you get to films like The North Star, the first half of the film is conceived as paradise and the second half as hell. So the harmony of nature, agricultural life is paradise, and then when the Nazis take over and raise the village to the ground, it becomes hell. So he has that, or the idea of dystopia and utopia. His films are, not every single film, but some of the major films in his cinema, or some of the key titles in his cinema, are sort of broken somewhere in the middle. And this is something I noticed the first time in the Garden of Eden, that the tone changes, the mood changes, perhaps not as much as the films made in the 30s and 40s, but it is still there. And for that, again, I think perhaps the pleasures of viewing the film aside, this is a key title for anyone who wants to explore his cinema. And that's why we put this as the very first film in the program. So the program in Bologna starts with the Garden of Eden. This one was very popular. I'm sure the entire San Francisco Film Preserve team have researched that how popular it was back in the day. And this was followed by The Racket in May the same year, 1928. Back to horror heroes. This is a film that Kevin Brownlow calls the most important gangster picture of the silent era, and I totally agree with him. It's an astonishing film because it is the film that basically establishes the entire grammar, visual grammar, of gangster and crime film in the sound period. So it's sort of a precursor to the gangster cycle of the 30s. It's about this sort of tough Irish cop in an unnamed but clearly Chicago-based city, sort of a Dirty Harry character who's trying to fight the sort of a local gangster and bootlegger called Nick Scarsi. This is, I think, perhaps Meiston's most fully realized silent film, visually speaking. And it's a film that you can, even if it's silent, you feel that you can hear the gunshots in it. It's just it's so powerful, and everything is so visual that creates a sense of having some sort of sonic impact on the viewer. Well, Lewis Milestone didn't make that many silent films compared to some other directors who've been the subject of the American Master in Bologna, but he was definitely one who was in love with silent cinema, because in his early sound films, you still see the dominance of image over dialogue. And later on, as late as 1948, in a film called No Minor Vices, it's a light film, it's a comedy in which Dana Andrews is fantasizing about the different ways in which Louis Jordan can seduce his wife, played by Lily Palmer, and each scenario is presented as a silent film. So small silent films within a sound film. Do you want me to? I can have a break now if you have any questions, or if there's any other question, or just see.
Well,
and then I can continue.
well, I have a comment, but let's we have a couple of questions maybe to get to. Well, I think you probably answered this one, but our good friend Alexander Payne has popped in to ask, sorry to ask an obvious question, but which of the 14 titles that you have programmed do you think will be revelations to the Bologna audience and to us? Aside from his much beloved All Quiet on the Western Front and Mice and Men and Walk in the Sun, which are, in your opinion, the really interesting or great ones?
Okay, yes, there are going to be some revelations, no doubt. Hallelujah, I'm a Bum is perhaps one of the greatest films of the 30s, period.
Okay.
There is no other film like Hallelujah, I'm a Bum. The two John Steinbeck films of Mice and Men, very well known. It's moving, it's shattering, but The Red Pony, the Technicolor film with Robert Mitchum, another example of something that I would call a major revelation. And The North Star is, it's a film that ideologically is just highly questionable. It's almost like a fantasy film. I talk about that a bit later. But again, I think that's a revelation in terms of what Hollywood was capable of producing in the 40s. So I strongly believe the selection is, most of them are either revelations of films that I care for very much. But it's not, his entire career, his entire filmography is not devoid of mistakes. In fact, after a certain point, it's just painful to look how low he sings, and there are reasons for that that I will get into. So with the advent of sound, Milestone shifted his focus to darker, more complex subjects, and war was perhaps the key subject for him. His All Quiet on the Western Front, I mean, now that is a masterpiece, Alexander, isn't it? And it's very funny because John Sweeney, the silent film accompanies, told me that in New Zealand, this was a film they were playing at the schools for children to explain war to them. And I perfectly understand, because this is a film that explains war in many different levels. And that's why he became a sort of someone obsessed with all the wars from World War I to the Korean War. Among so many other things, he is capable of showing the most agonizing aspect of every war. The long stretches of waiting for something to happen. And he is the director who can make that work, because war films usually avoid that. Lewis Milestone is the director who's most effective, psychologically, emotionally effective scenes are the ones that they are just waiting for something to happen. And that's something you see All Quiet on the Western Front, but also A Walk in the Sun. He was also directing the battle scenes like a general. They were expansive, they were realistic, and he was capable of directing in a certain way to sketch out for you the battlefield psychologically in your head. So you get a sense of the relation between different points, the military logistics, and in effect, making these films far more believable. But at the same time, he was a humanist, and he was as emotionally sincere and compassionate in his war films as Douglas Sirk was in his melodramas. Now I ask a question, and this is a question I've been struggling with for the past 2 months. Was Lewis Milestone anti-war? I've asked myself this question over and over again. And All Quiet on the Western Front is definitely a masterpiece of anti-war cinema. But today, I will answer this question. No, he was not. He was not. No, for 2 reasons. First of all, I think the pacifist of the First World War changed and transformed into something else when it came to the Second World War. Because, you know, if your brother is somewhere in Ukraine or Moldavia opens the door and he's instantly shot, that's the way his brother was killed, by a German officer, then probably cannot stay a pacifist. The other thing is, and more on this later, but he was a true believer in the idea of the pass through change is a pass through blood. So he had this, what we call sort of Marxist-Leninist notion of history. And he was ready to embrace it. And you see it increasingly present in the films, the second phase of war films, when the Second World War started. the thing about, before talking about some other aspects of his cinema, I think it is important now to explain, because I mentioned the Marxist-Leninist line of thought. So this is a director who makes very successful films, very popular films that are very often praised as, to borrow a phrase from one of the trade journals, cinema milestones, way into the late 40s. Now, in the 40s, late 40s, because of the leftist themes in some of his films, also his close association with some of the most prominent Hollywood communists, he became the easy target for during the McCarthy era. He was not a member of the Communist Party of America, but his name ended up, he had signed petitions, he were in picket lines, he was everywhere. He was an agitator, he was engaged with politics, he believed in change. And he is, Rob, I think just watching the films and trying to learn as much about him as possible, it seems to me that he was one of the very few directors of his generation who actually believed in change, and was very different from the cocktail party communists that populated Hollywood. So his name ended up on the so-called Hollywood, the unfriendly 19, right? And of course, today we know that the fact that he was born in a foreign country and he was Jewish might have contributed to, among other things, contributed to that sort of suspicious look at him. When the list of the unfriendly 19 was published, which included names like Robert Rossen, someone very close to Lewis Milestone. They collaborated on 3 films, and all three of those films were playing in Bologna, but also Bertolt Brecht, Edward Dmytryk. All these people gather at Lewis Milestone's house, the kind of the famous evening, to meet with expert lawyers and seek advice on how to proceed. So even though he was not a party member, he was a central figure. He was this guiding figure, a figure of authority, sort of even a father figure to many people, like, come to my place, we decide how to deal with this. He was never officially blacklisted, but his career suffered irreparable consequences over a long period of time. And most of the 50s were spent working in television and very mediocre assignments. It's so sad to see, like, he drifted to England, made films there. He made a film in Italy. So in that sense, it's close to compare to some other directors with a sort of same or similar fate. Frank Tuttle is a very good example. We did a retrospective on him in 2020. And films were taken away from him. He has a war film in the 50s called Pork Chop Hill with Gregory Peck. It's a fine film, but if you look at the opening credit of the film, it's so messy that it's unbelievable that a director that has made like all those classics of the 30s and 40s, like the credits, what is this garbage? The film itself, as I said, is quite fine, but they were re-editing his films and they were taken away from him. Now I ask a question again, that was he actually read? Of course, he had the vision to employ some great names, Clifford Odets, as I said, Robert Rossen, Lillian Hellman, Aaron Copland, Bertolt Brecht, worked with all of them, who they all were people on the left or official members of the party. But when you look at the films, especially films at the beginning of sound era, there are films that today we can easily categorize as red or at least pink films. The title I mentioned earlier, Hallelujah, I'm a Bomb, from 1933, it's a proletarian musical, basically. If not a proletarian musical, it is definitely an anti-capitalist musical. And the entire film is song and rhyming dialogue. And it was a project conceived for Al Jolson, who's a homeless person living in Central Park during the Great Depression. And he's called the Mayor of New York. And he's friends with Harry Langdon, who plays a communist in the film. So he's an actual communist. So when the cops approach, he called them Tsars, Kazakhs, or something like that. And it's a film which has an ending very similar to City Lights, but Lewis Milestone spares no sort of catharsis or anything. It's quite opposite. When, like earlier in the film, Al Jolson has saved the girl from suicide, and she loses her memory when actually she realizes that Al Jolson has saved her. She finds him pathetic, so Al Jolson sort of returns to Central Park and it starts being a bomb again. It's a very tough film, but at the same time, very, very original. He, in the same year, 1933, he had another project, a project that he was developing for Columbia Pictures. It was called the Red Square. So the idea was to show the progressive side of the Russian Revolution and the formation of Soviet Union, in particular the 5-year plan. He even traveled to Russia to research for the film, but last minute Harry Cohn balked at the prospect of producing what he feared would be seen as Bolshevik propaganda. Again, it pops up in every single film he made in the 30s and 40s. In Edge of Darkness, one of his greatest war films, the film starts with this really eerie sequence in which a German troop arrives at a coastal village in Norway. They look around. Every single person in the village is dead, massacred. Not only the local population, the entire local population, but also the occupying German army. There's only one person alive, who's later we realize he's the capitalist. And because he's a capitalist, he was also a collaborator who has gone mad. In the film Arch of Triumph, the character played by Charles Boyer, sides with the freedom fighters in Spain. He has fought in the Spanish Civil Wars and get into an argument with Francoists who stay in the same hotel. And perhaps the most notorious example, not only in his filmography of sort of red films, but perhaps in American cinema of the 40s, is The North Star. It's about the Ukrainian village's fight against the Nazis. It was designed as a piece of agitprop, basically. So it opens with peasants, all American actors, of course, singing and dancing their way to the fields and factories, like the Ziegfeld Follies. It is done like a Ziegfeld Follies musical, but there are these clean, gorgeous tractors and women in floral dresses. It is very similar to sort of Stalinist musicals one sees in the same period and earlier. And then when the invasion of the German army happens, of course, everybody becomes a fighter and they swear allegiance to the Soviet army, and everything is directed as if they are about to join a posse in the film. This was Lilian Hellman's only original motion picture script, and was meant to support the US government in their effort to sort of foster empathy for the Soviet allies. And for Milestone, it was also something very personal because he knew those people. He came from that region. So it was very urgent for him. And this is perhaps the closest Hollywood ever got to endorsing the achievements of Marxist-Leninist society. It is a rousing film in a very distorted way, of course. And unsurprisingly, during the McCarthy era, it became like exhibit number one, this film, and all those who were involved in the production of it. But if you come to Bologna, if you catch up with these films later somewhere else, you will see many themes and many sort of situations that are highly unusual for films made in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s. But I would say the sort of the reddest moment in his cinema was in terms of his style to filmmaking. After a certain point, he just dropped the idea of dealing with actors. Of course, he had the actors, and most of the time he had even the stars at his disposal. But he decided to go for a collectivist approach to storytelling. So a film like The North Star has many different actors, or Edge of Darkness, Errol Flynn, Walter Houston, Anne Bangster, different, more than 5 major stars in one film. But each of them get an equal amount of screen time, and they get the same amount of screen time next to sort of beat players, because it feels that the whole construction of narrative was somehow socialist. There was a sense of everybody's equal. And he experimented with that in the 30s in Hallelujah, I'm a Bomb, but also in his only Columbia film called The Captain Hates the Sea. It's a film, sort of Grand Hotel on board a cruise ship, and loads of characters and a really good ensemble cast. Each actor contributes to the story, regardless of the place they have in the plot. Pretty much like Jacques Tati, what Jacques Tati later did in a film like Playtime. You see that in The Captain Hates the Sea. Rob, you asked me a question before we joined the conversation earlier today, that is there going to be any film by Lewis Milestone in the Piazza? To which I replied, he's very unusual. And I promised to explain why I think he's very unusual. First of all, his compositions are very eccentric and very lyrical. His style, more than any other filmmaker of that generation, is close to the Soviet cinema, basically. This year in Bologna, we have a strand dedicated to Odessa, the city, and a school of cinema and filmmaking that emerged from there. He was from Odessa, and he knew what Soviet directors were up to. He was simultaneously a realist director and someone obsessed with the stylization. A stylization to the point of becoming unrealistic, basically, which is a paradox and one of the reasons that his films look so different from other films made in that period. He could achieve a sort of a modern visual style or visual language through very unusual, unlikely elements, like the convergence of gestural. His films are very, very gestural, the approach to acting. Very Brechtian. There's very often a sense of distance, and very rhythmic, very much influenced by music. Some of this you can see in The Garden of Eden, but sound films even more. So for instance, in The Edge of Darkness, he wants to introduce different characters, right? And these are members of the local Norwegian resistance. When I say gestural, every character that is introduced, we see her or him in the work environment. A baker, a barber, whatever. We see doing exactly what they are. If they are a barber, they're shown in the barbershop. It's also very Brechtian, as I said, almost empty soundstage, and the camera gets close to them as if introducing each individual. And everything is syncopated to music. He was also famous for sort of window frame shots and frame within frame. So he's basically like a Bruegel reinterpreted through the Soviet eye or the Soviet cinema eye. he was a master of creating this sort of frame within frame shots, very expansive, and then breaking these very, very dense shots with entities, dividing them by different elements like bed bonds, objects, very clustered, his films. And he liked to create, and you see this in films like Of Mice and Men, in his compositions, adding elements to the composition, particularly threads, belts, fences. Many of his films are set in the countryside, out there in the open. That's why you have these things, right? Crisscrossing the composition and sort of jotting out from the depths of field into the camera. He wanted to create a sort of physical contact between the viewer and the scene, the subject of the film. Almost 3D if the films are projected from good print. The other thing, of course, he was very famous for was the tracking shots. But Rob, he does something very unusual with the tracking shots. Of course, if you close your eyes, you think about tracking shots, remember the tracking shots across the battlefield and the trenches in All Quiet on the Western Front. But if you look at it again, he's constantly breaking them into pieces. So if the tracking shot moves like this, he constantly breaks it like time signatures, and they are completely musical. I've been looking at them, especially in Of Mice and Men and Quiet on the Western Front, see how they really have the function of time signature, the way he breaks them into, uses the line and then breaks them into the smaller pieces. He also does something else, which is for me the key to his cinema. If you want to remember, are we okay time-wise?
Well, actually, I was about to say we have a couple more minutes. I would love to actually keep going for a couple more hours, but I probably like a couple more minutes, and I'm afraid we're going to hit our hour.
Okay, so, fine.
Yeah.
Let me just this is to me the key, which is linearity and circularity. So he uses tracking shot, whatever, there is a line, and then he breaks into a circle. Look at the similar situations in which the camera circling the characters, or characters creating a circle in the Garden of Eden. You see that in all his films, this idea of circle for community. Sometimes the camera doing it, like the famous 360-degree camera movement in Rain, when Joan Crawford is dancing. A film like Nights of New York from 1929 sort of pushes this to the limit. But this was pretty much his way of finding a way to translate his idea of individuality and collectivism into something cinematic. And these films, hopefully, should make sense when you watch them back to back. I'm okay to stop here now.
Thank you so much. I mean, you covered so much amazing material. I had this, this giant page of prompts for you, and used none of them. Tim and Barbara, I'm sorry we didn't get your questions, but I feel like the presentation sort of ended up covering most of the material you were asking about anyway. So I really appreciate your questions.
People are coming to Bologna, they can always, or they can send the questions to you, and
Sure.
I'm more than happy to answer by email.
I think they're very specific Bologna questions, so I suspect you're going to, they'll both be there, I think. So, and hopefully many more people. So thank you so very much for this. It was really great. It was really engaging. For those of you who joined us online, thank you for joining us. For those that you will see this later recorded, I think you've really enjoyed it. Now quickly, Barbara, I'll do this for Barbara. She asked twice about, are you going to be on panels or doing any speaking in Bologna?
The only thing I would do in Bologna is cycling. I
Okay.
will try to reduce the talk. I will be there, but no talk on. There's no time for it.
There is. I do know that you wrote a lot of or maybe all of the catalog entries, so she can read up in the catalog. Okay. Anyway, So thank you, Ehsan. Thank you so much. I think we'll relieve you of your camera duties at this point, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks in Italy.
I look forward to
Yes. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us today. To keep up with the San Francisco Film Preserve, please follow us online on social media. You can find us at SF Film Preserve. And if you're not already, I really encourage you to sign up for our newsletter at filmpreserve.org and share it with your friends. We promise not to spam, and we never share our mailing list. Our next installment of Online with SFFP takes place on Friday, July 18, when Veronica Johnson of Maynooth University in Ireland will discuss Ireland's first production company, appropriately named the Film Company of Ireland, and its owner, Nell O'Mara Sullivan. You can learn more and register for this event and learn all about us by visiting filmpreserve.org. Thanks so much, and we'll see you at the movies.